Super. My name is Anna Spenceley, and I'd like to warmly welcome you to this virtual book launch on Earth Day. I'm delighted that one of the authors, Michael Wright, is co-hosting this event with me. Thank you very much, Michael. And to help things run smoothly, we'd request participants to please mute your microphone and also turn off your videos unless you're speaking. This just helps if people have got lower bandwidth. Please let us know in the chat who you are and where you're joining us from. And we're recording this event, so we will post the video online afterwards for people to watch at their leisure and for anyone who wasn't able to join this morning. And we hope that this will be a relaxed and informative event to highlight some of the resources in the new handbook and also connect you with some of the lead authors in this volume. So why was this book developed? It really emerged from the sustainable tourism research and consulting work that I've been working on over the last 2 decades across more than 30 countries. And during this time, I've had the really good fortune to collaborate with many highly skilled consultants and foresighted clients. And this period has taught me a great deal about approaches that work, those that don't, and the daunting array of potential landmines that need to be avoided along the way. And work on sustainable tourism is demanding, whether you're the one that's doing the work or the one asking for it to be done. There are ambitious and complex tasks where clients have high expectations and practitioners need to respond to a wide range of multifaceted challenges. However, there's often limited time in which to undertake assignments and deliver meaningful answers, and also budgets that aren't always expandable if the task changes along the way. Clients expect and should get value for money and high quality deliverables. So what would have been helpful for me, particularly in the early years of my work, would have been access to a suite of good practices that address different approaches and techniques for sustainable tourism. And I realized that this kind of resource wasn't only needed by consultants, but was also needed by the governments, destinations, and tourism companies that needed information, and also by the agencies commissioning sustainable tourism assignments, so as to develop a common understanding of what good work should look like during the process and what it should be delivered at the end. So to me, it seemed that there was a gap in information available to everybody involved. So the idea for the handbook was born, and Edward Elgar kindly agreed to publish it. And I believe that this handbook is going to be valuable for all those working on sustainable tourism, whether they're practitioners, consultants, governments, tourism destinations, companies, or financing agencies. And all of these players need to know what to ask for, what's entailed in the process, and what a good output looks like. So the handbook is divided into 4 main parts that address different elements of sustainable tourism planning, operation, and evaluation. And it combines practical experience from 50 leading international practitioners, many of whom I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, and all of whom I respect immensely. And these authors share step-by-step approaches to practical problems, such as how to write bankable financial proposals and how to consult with stakeholders, and also how to manage visitors. So the book transfers knowledge from the academic realm and also from extensive practitioner experience into one essential 550-page volume. This is the table of contents of the toolbox. So there are 27 chapters which provide insightful detail into key sustainable tourism issues. You can review abstracts for all the chapters and access the foreword by Professor Xavier Font and the first chapter at the link shown here, which just went live a few minutes ago. Notably, the authors have developed and finalized their papers in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't take their efforts lightly. The past year has been incredibly challenging for people across the world. So that the authors were able to complete their contributions during this unique period in our lives is a real testament to their resolve and professionalism. So thank you all. And furthermore, the volume was peer reviewed by Professor Marina Novelli, Dr. Susan Snyman, and Dr. Louise Twining-Ward, who I thank immensely. The handbook is currently available in hardback and also e-back versions via the Edward Elgar website. And I'm very happy to share that between now and Friday, which is tomorrow in this part of the world, Edward Elgar are offering the hardback in a special launch special for £50 plus postage using the code shown here. After this and for the rest of April, you can get a 50% discount using the code on the screen. And from May onwards, there are 35% discounts available to members of the groups that are listed here. Yesterday or earlier today, depending on where you are, we heard from 5 of the Handbook's lead authors who shared their experiences in the first launch event. In this event, I'd like to warmly welcome lead authors Paul Eagles, Ted Manning, Monica Mick, Shane Feyers, and Carolin Lusby. They will be sharing snapshots of their chapters and reflecting on how their knowledge can help us to rebuild the tourism sector in a sustainable and resilient way. And as the authors present, please enter any questions or comments in the chat, and we will try and address them during the discussion session too. And also, please remember in the chat, just write down who you are and where you're from, say hi. It'd be good to know who's listening in. So without further ado, our first speaker is Dr. Professor Paul Eagles. He is a distinguished professor emeritus at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And Paul specializes in environmental recreation and tourism planning with 45 years of planning experience. He has undertaken planning and research in these fields in over 40 countries and has 410 publications, of which 142 are peer-reviewed. Paul has generously contributed 2 chapters to this book, and he will share insights with both. So Paul, if you can please unmute your mic, put your video on and share your screen, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me properly? Okay, good. Chapter 5, Commercialization Strategies for Tourism Within Protected Areas. There are a series of direct and indirect tourism services that someone has to deliver. And this chapter attempts to provide the pros and cons of various models, management models for the delivery of these direct and indirect services. A direct service would be, for example, special events. An indirect might be the roads or the rail lines or the electrical distribution. Someone has to deliver them, and someone has to make the decision of who delivers them. And here's an example that I just put in from South Africa and Canada of various tourism services. Rondovel, accommodation, a tourism outfitter, a children's camp, and a bookstore, all delivered by someone. Now, how was that decision made? So there's 2 basic models, insourcing and outsourcing. So this book chapter looks at the pros and cons of insourcing, which means the government agency directly providing those services, or outsourcing using some other body to provide those services. And working with Anna and others, we've come up with a variety of models for outsourcing, and there are 5 here. For-profit, which is very common. For-profit private companies, non-profit organizations, which is popular but less common, local community, pretty widespread, other government departments, which is rare but does occur, and some kind of complicated joint venture company. There are pros and cons for all of those. Now, outsourcing is a complicated and expensive management activity, especially for government agencies that require tenders and require some combination of license, permit, lease, or concession. And so the pros and cons of those models are really, really complicated. And one of the things I do is I try to summarize the literature on the cons of outsourcing to private, for-profit corporations. And an example is what happens if your corporation goes bankrupt in the middle of its contract? What happens if that corporation stops delivering according to the contract stipulations? Or what happens if the contractor sells to another contractor? I deal with all of the pros and cons of all of those. So this is what I'm attempting to do in that book chapter. It's not a comprehensive review, but I think it's novel. I've never seen anyone quite do what I've done. Okay, Anna, is that good for the first one? The second one is quite different. And my 3 co-authors here are all from Croatia. And we worked on the Plitvice National Park management plan over a 4-year period, like 2014, 2018. And what I've done, I developed chapter on developing targets for destination visitation in parks. And the targets that one sets for the visitation in parks has a minimum. Typically that minimum is finance. You need a certain amount of money to keep the lights on. Then there's some kind of maximum volume based on ecology, cultural, or social impact. Between those is some kind of acceptable range. And what I'm doing is providing some examples. The first example is from Canada. It's a national park. And here's an example of a national park. It's Canada's second smallest national park, but it's one of the most popular because it's a birdwatching mecca. It's one of the top 10 birdwatching spots in North America. So from 1950 to now, park management has consistently reduced peak load visitor numbers in the park. For example, parking spots in 1950 were 6,000. In 1975, 1,400. In 1990, 1,150. In 1997, 1,000. I describe how that came about and how that's used, and it was successfully put in place, all done within management planning. The second example from Canada is Piney Provincial Park, and here's just photographs. It's a fabulous lakeshore park, sand dunes, but you'll notice the photo in the middle, and that shows extensive erosion on the sand dunes from human traffic. So here's a graph of one that I've never seen, and I put this together myself. This is all the visitor use data from 1958 to last year. And you'll see the numbers peaked in 1970 at 1.7 million visitor days of use. That was brought down to a little over 300,000 by management action. A lot of people say that can't be done. Well, here it was done, and I describe in a lot of detail how that was done to bring the numbers down. They've creeped up since then under a new management regime. And the third example, which is much more recent, is Spenceley National Park, a World Heritage Site in Croatia, which has a peak load problem. Fabulous World Heritage Site, magnificent site. A photograph I include here is crowding on the trails. So World Heritage Site, the visitor use numbers had gone excessive. World Heritage suggested they were going to make it an endangered site, and we put together, not we, UNEP and the park agency put together a team to do a new plan. And I haven't put much data because there's been quite a few publication on that. The top graph you'll see here is visitation over a year, and that's daily visitation. And you see it peaks at 16,000 visitors a day in a central gorge. However, the really key thing is the bottom graph. You'll see a line across, and that is visitation on different days and hours across the day. And you'll see that the park estimates that they should have 1,250 people at any one time in the park. So the entire plan is to bring the visitation to that peak. Once that happens, no one else is allowed in. But it's much more complicated than that. And we give a full detail of how that target was reached and how it's been accessed. Interestingly, COVID has been very helpful here because it destroyed the tourism industry. So when you restart it, you can have all the new management plan policies in place. There we go. We did that in just a few minutes. 2 book chapters.
Well done, Paul. You actually only used half the time you had, so thank you.
Well, we go to questions then. How rare is that?
Well done. Bravo. Okay, that's great because it means we'll have more time for discussion at the end. Thank you, Paul. And I think really important what you said about how important these materials will be used as we build back better. We've seen some destinations re-emerge so very rapidly as places have been reopening. So managing numbers and making sure that we make sure that there's a balance between what can be taken so visitor experience is good and the environment is protected is really important. Thank you very much, Paul. So next, I would like to welcome Dr. Ted Manning. He is president of Tourist Inc., based in Ottawa, Canada. And he works providing integrated planning for heritage sites and tourism destinations worldwide. He's worked in over 50 countries, focusing on protecting the world's special places. Ted has published 23 books and over 100 articles on development, tourism, and environmental management topics. He's an associate member of the Club of Rome, former president of the Canadian Association of Geographers and adjunct professor of geography and environmental studies at Carleton University. Ted, welcome. Please, if you could unmute your mic, I see your slides, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Am I unmuted? I am unmuted. Okay. Yeah, because otherwise I'm just talking to myself. I'm here to talk about risk management, which is really what we have been doing for many years through the UNWTO and prior to that, the WTO. The notion being, if you can't see it, you can't manage it. Now, where we go, let's go to the next one. The whole notion is to develop methods of having risk management tools in place to understand through the use of indicators and participatory processes the actual impacts of activity, the sensitivity of given sites, and the kinds of changes that managers have to manage. The notion is they need the right information at the right time in order to do real management. We focus on sustainability because, quite frankly, they've got to know what they wish to sustain. When you look at a beach like this one in Costainets, is it too crowded or isn't it? Well, from many biological perspectives, it's grossly overcrowded, but there are over 200,000 people having a hell of a good time. So we have many different indicators that are in fact related to whether or not it's at risk or not, as well as to whether the actions you're trying to take to save it or to preserve it in fact work. The whole idea is to know how much the pressures are. There's a 7-ship a day in St. Martin, which has a population of 7,000. It may be a nice day to be there for you, or it may not be. A lot of that depends on your own values and on your own reactions. The whole process started back in 1992 when we met with UNWTO and some others to try and figure out what was happening to tourism and why a lot of people were reporting problems that they really couldn't manage. And that generated the first guide, which I've covered in the chapter, on why it's there, what people need to know. And after that, we set up a series of workshops, and I've tried to extract some of the lessons from many of these. They've happened all over the world. We've been really lucky to visit these places and to talk with the people. And we're going to sell you in the chapter on a participatory approach that gets you the information you need for the key risks when you need them. The whole idea is to have the right information that's relevant, feasible, credible, and clear to the people you have to convince to make changes to do management. We also have done a lot of field testing around the world. I give a few examples here. The one in Yangshuo, China, actually evolved into one of the very first observatories of sustainable tourism that is now being built around the world. We're up to 46 of them now, I think, when I last looked. We're trying to put one in Ecuador right now, if we could just get there during the COVID. So what are our lessons learned? Well, there's a lot of stuff in common, but there are many critical cutoff factors. In a sense, where's the precipice that you might fall over, where your destination might run into something that in fact is not fixable? And how do you in fact make sure you have the right information in front of you to hopefully see it coming as an early warning system? So we come back to really what's this all about? It is, what do we really want to sustain? And if so, do we have the measures in place that allow us to see it, to react early enough to take care of it, to develop standards that in fact relate to what is real, and ultimately to foster exchange of information between destinations and destination managers and the people who live and work there, so that they can understand how to sustain the values and the assets that are most important. And I hope I manage that in 5 minutes.
You certainly did, Ted. You have another 40 seconds. No, thank you
Well,
very much, Ted.
Don't worry. Give it to someone else.
Okay, thanks so much, Ted. That was really excellent. I think the use of indicators is going to be more and more important now, and also seeing whether we got the indicators right in the first place as well before things crashed. So thank you very much.
Well, above all, we got to make sure we have the new ones to really be able to react to what's coming that we were not anticipating, like COVID and like climate change. And in fact, we got some work going on that right now. I've hinted at a bit of in the chapter, but we're not there yet.
Great, thank you very much, Ted. And we'll have more discussion as well later on in this session. So thank you, Ted. Next, I'd like to welcome Monica Mick. She is a multilingual tourism professional and founder of Mono Ecolodge International, which is a branding firm she established in 2017. She was also a doctoral candidate in sustainable business at Waterloo University, Ontario, Canada, working on the issue of eco-lodge branding. Previously, Monica worked as a brand manager for Starwood Hotels and Resorts and graduated from Waterloo University with an MES degree in tourism geography. Great, Monica, welcome. Please see your slides. Thank you, take it away.
Okay, am I unmuted? Can I be heard?
Yes, you can be heard, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So I am here to talk about the importance of tourism certification audits. And through this chapter, basically what I did is I reviewed different types of certifications existent on the market, their mechanism of operation and aspects like criteria compliance and audited logistics. Also, I was looking into the global framework for the governance of certification and the tools available to practitioners to learn more about this concept. I used one case study and I chose Costa Rica's Certificate for Sustainable Tourism, CST, for that case study to show a large scale sourceful example of what a successful certification means. CST is basically a holistic program, certification program that once you get to know its structure a little bit better and how it functions, it helps in terms of giving you the big picture of what efficiency means at a certification level and how it's being achieved. There are some parts of the program that have received some criticism that are also included in the chapter, but I'm not going to be focusing on that here. It is important to understand, I think, trying to put this into the context of COVID-19, it's important to understand certifications as they serve as indicators of performance for a firm or a business claiming to be sustainable. And the issue with that is because we don't have actually a widely agreed concept of sustainable development, which significantly complicates the sustainability assessment. So I think it's considering or taking into consideration what's going on right now in the world health-wise, certifications will occupy an even more important role due to travelers placing, in my opinion, more importance now than before on pre-planning as well as pre-screening. Whatever place or accommodation they choose to for their vacation or services. Personal experiences, advice from experts, and concerns for distancing will also guide consumer behaviors in the short to mid-term. And there has to be, or there will be probably a little bit more pressure for collaborations between businesses and also for certification programs to adopt global health standards by the WTTC or any other organization that puts them forward. So the purpose of this chapter, as I said, just to highlight some key sections, is while looking at the different documents to pull together the information that I needed, I basically went through different types of reports put together by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council and the International Organization for Standardization and their tourism auditing framework. As I said, I also looked at best auditing practices using Costa Rica's example. And I also talked about the proliferation of certifications and compliance challenges among auditing participants, because this is a very important part of certification programs. And on my slide, on my next slide, to give you a little bit of a breakdown and a little bit more detail on what you can find in this chapter, what I thought it was important. I went through the core principles of the global framework. So basically, if you're new into the industry, or maybe if you just want to update yourself on how certifications are being handled currently, if you look at the different sections of the chapter, you should have enough information to kind of like, have an opinion of what's going on right now. By having some details on the methods for obtaining and presenting audit evidence, basically what is the main objective of an audit, and how to increase the degree to which companies and operations are sustainable, and to encourage ongoing measurement of the sustainability components of certification. You'll be able to find all that information in the chapter. And to wrap it up, there is the first part of it talk about the basis of auditing. So you'll have some information on the fundamentals of auditing, barriers at certification level, and the best practices that exist. So when I was writing this chapter, I wrote it basically thinking the most important thing for me, and what caused confusion when I was writing it, was the barriers, right? That include scarcity of external auditing and accreditation, and also high costs. So the issue right now is that there are hundreds of different certification systems available worldwide, and some of which are run by certifying industry bodies, other by separate accreditation bodies. Most developed countries also tend to only formally recognize the degrees awarded by themselves. So, and do not readily accredit the credentials of even leading bodies in other nations. And the more qualified or licensed a person or an organization is, the more effective the product or service the approved body offers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be internationally accepted or adopted. And I think what auditors and people interested in this field of work need to keep in mind here is that with the pandemic and the stress that this pandemic has been putting on tourism businesses, is the fact that there is a higher risk now than before of non-compliance, and with certification criteria at certain clients. During the pandemic, many small businesses have found necessary to participate in various forms of federal economic stimulus funding. So it wouldn't be a surprise if most of the information that they give away, or how they approach certifications from now on, and the process and how they engage with auditors, might be impacted. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. And I put together some useful tools here, just to wrap up. The links are available. There's also access. I can provide access to the ESO guide, including guide number 60 from 2004, which is the conformity assessment, the good practices one, the one that GSTC used in putting together their accreditation and certification criteria. So yeah, I think that would be all for me.
Thank you so much, Monica. I think what you're saying about the potential non-compliance of people now during COVID is really important. We've also seen that there's been so much more use of plastic and things in healthcare as well during COVID. So these are all going to be important issues to address, more importantly. And also, just to reflect, we had a presentation by Randy Durband of the GSTC on the last session, and we were also speaking about the standards in the GSTC there. Oh, so Monica, okay. Thank you very much for your work and your contribution to the book.
Thank you.
So next we will hear from Shane Feyers, who is a PhD candidate in interdisciplinary ecology and biodiversity, and a Biodiversity Institute fellow at the University of Florida. He's specializing in urban and regional planning and studies conservation, land use, and the geography of responsible nature-based tourism on private property in the United States and beyond. Shane holds a master's in environmental management in human dimensions from Yale School of Environment. So Shane, welcome. We can see your slides. Please unmute, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for the welcome, Anna. I'm co-author on Biodiversity and Stressors Rapid Assessment chapter with Gretchen Stokes and Dr. Vanessa Hull at the University of Florida. This chapter provides nature tourism professionals easy to understand resource that they can use to measure and monitor the impacts to biodiversity assets that they depend on for their tourism goods and services. Most of the resources that currently exist are geared towards protected area managers, but in many places, unfortunately, protected areas, as a lot of us know, are understaffed or under-resourced, which prevents monitoring all activities. Managers can't really be babysitters for the operators and the visitors. In some cases, the resources may be available, but it may just be a matter of impacts happening out of sight and control of the managers. In other cases, there could be stakeholders that want to take on the added responsibility but don't know how. And we also know that nature tourism isn't always occurring inside protected areas. So this chapter encourages and equips the tourism professionals in the private sector to conduct the monitoring themselves and make inferences about the positive and negative impacts of their operations. For many of the resources that do exist, they often focus on issues of trail compaction and soil health, invasive species, and what we've been hearing a lot about here, waste management and visitor size control. But we also know that tourism and recreation can lead to impacts that have immediate and long-term effects on wildlife and biodiversity, but there aren't a lot of resources here for non-scientists to understand how to measure them or to manage them themselves. This is because it's difficult to measure impacts to wildlife and biodiversity specifically, which often rely on behavioral studies, which are complex and time-consuming. So if we want operators and citizens to monitor their impacts, we have to provide them with procedures that are easier, faster, and more direct. So in this chapter, the co-authors and I have created 2 tools to fit those requirements. And the first is a biodiversity assessment, that is determining what's there or what should be there at a destination or a tourism site. How do we do this? Collecting baseline biological data is a long-established process that's used to conduct a biodiversity assessment. And it sounds sophisticated, and it sometimes is. But for this chapter, we've simplified it down and made the steps more basic and still evidence-based. You identify the area or organisms tourism operators care about, and then collect the background information about those species and spaces. Once they have that information, they can conduct a rapid field assessment with remote sensing devices and compare what should be to what is, or maybe more importantly to them, what they want compared to what they have. For habitat, the chapter keeps it simple. It provides users basic instructions on how to measure different components of habitat, and then provides a scale to rate the quality of these components from impacted from intact to degraded. And this can be conducted seasonally and over time. The chapter also provides a legend to guide the quality ratings to give users a sense of what intact and degraded means. And altogether, this allows users to monitor the habitats and how they change. For wildlife, we try and keep it just as simple. This is a presence and absence study, and that's all that is really needed. In this chapter, we provide the instructions on how to use remote sensing devices. And this allows the users to assess what animals should be there, what animals are there, and how is that changing seasonally. It does have a moderate upfront cost, but really over time, the costs go down substantially, and it becomes easy to collect that data and document the wildlife presence or absence. Once these data are collected, users can answer the most important questions: is habitat quality and quantity going up or down? Is the presence of wildlife increasing or decreasing? With that information together, you should be able to evaluate some sense of how healthy the ecosystem is, what type of wildlife is there, and how is the habitat performing. Just to kind of go through more quickly on this one, the second tool is stressors to biodiversity over time. This is a little more controversial, but the point here is to identify the different potential stressors the examples and implications of those, and the types of interventions that are available. The chapter offers a stressor calculator to identify a frequency of those stressors taking place, their duration and intensity. When you calculate it together, you come out with an average that provides some sense of what types of changes you should anticipate from your operations. The chapter gives an example of the calculator in use, a worksheet in the appendix so that the quality can also be monitored over time, and then the outcome back to this sense of how operations are impacting habitat and how they are impacting wildlife. And then lastly, I know I'm a little over time, that's our chapter. I appreciate everybody listening along. We think this tool has a lot of importance, especially because it's applicable to any species, habitat type, and in any location. More relevant to the goal of the book, I think in restarting the industry, this is helping build back better by giving operators the opportunity to use this tool, requiring it from businesses. And it also is free compared to certifications and other standards. It offers the same benefits, it's evidence-based, and it's really has less complexity. If anybody has any questions, please reach out.
Thank you so much, Shane. That's really good. Really, really useful work, and really an important addition to the book as well. And we've seen during this pandemic, there's been real issues around transmission of zoonotic diseases between primates and animals and people and animals. And I think, you know, having good protocols for all wildlife experience is going to be increasingly important. We've been seeing things with gorilla tourism in Rwanda, for example, and use of face masks and so on. So anyway, thank you very much, Shane.
Thank you, Anna.
And last but not least, of course, we have Dr. Carolin Lusby. She is assistant professor in tourism at Florida International University's Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism Management, where she oversees the tourism program. Carolin was a Fulbright scholar in Brazil, where she consulted in community-based tourism and collaborated in various research projects. She's passionate about travel and connecting people to people while preserving nature and cultural resources. Carolin, you have the floor. If you would mind unmuting and sharing your video if you're able. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Last but not least, yes, so why this chapter is important. This chapter is called Consultation Approaches in Sustainable Tourism. And I think one of the big things about sustainable tourism is that instead of this top-down approach, it's supposed to be bottom-up. And so that approach means that by virtue of it, we really need to consult with stakeholders and residents. And so this chapter is really kind of a how-to guide on how to do that, how to really consult with local people and different stakeholders. So it starts very basic with how to identify your stakeholders, what is a primary and a secondary stakeholder. It looks at stakeholder analysis. It looks at the history of stakeholder engagement. It looks at stakeholder mappings by geographic areas, by interest. It provides how-to guides in how to look at stakeholders through the lens of influence and interest. So that gives a rating mechanism of which stakeholders are more relevant for your project and which are not so relevant. And based on this rating system, then the chapter suggests different strategies to engage these stakeholders. That could be on the lower interest and lower influence side, just to inform them on what's going on, such as through newsletters. It could be through on the high interest and high influence side, actually involving them through voting schemes, for example, or it could be something like consulting them. On the consulting side, the chapter goes into more detail in terms of different methods of how to do that. So it looks into focus groups, town hall meetings, surveys, interviews, and just describes those different methods a little bit. It also looks into the pros and cons of each approach and when that would be most suitable. The chapter then goes into analysis of the data and just some quick things to look for. So for example, p-values or sampling methods, those kinds of things. It also looks at scales and the type of data. So if anybody hasn't really had any background in research, just gives just enough background to understand what somebody should be looking out for. And then lastly, it looks at considerations to include women, minorities, and youth, which a lot of times is overlooked, and especially for those of you who have done consulting in more remote parts of the world, this can be quite a challenging task. So that's the chapter in a nutshell, and I'm super excited about this book. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. You finished in super speed. And I think what's really interesting about consulting during this period is how challenging it has been over the past year to actually do consultation on a good basis. Normally you could have face-to-face meetings easily, you could travel to see people, you could have workshops and gatherings, and the dialogue was much, much easier. And I mean, you've got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to say about consultation amid COVID and how we can adapt during this period? Sorry to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to share now, that would be awesome.
No, I think you're absolutely right. So many times like that face-to-face visit is so key. And right now we're forced to adapt to speak, more through remote means, Zoom meetings, online forums. And again, I think we have to face through, by applying these different methods, who are we excluding and how can we make sure that we still include everybody? And so I think that is a challenge that we're facing. However, I do believe that, with consciousness, we can overcome these barriers.
Good. That's great, Carolyn. I'm glad to hear you're optimistic, and we'll try our hardest to do that. So this was really fantastic. I'd like to thank all the presenters for their presentations. Now we will move into a discussion section. We've got about 15 minutes for discussion on the handbook, its chapters, the work of the authors, and also how to use the tools. And we've already started to discuss a bit about how we can use them to build back better from COVID-19. So the floor is open. Please paste your questions into the comments or the questions into the chat, or raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And Michael will be drawing on your questions and directing them. Thank you. The floor is open.
Yeah, great. Just to kick off, I see Edith and Paul are having a good conversation, which is good to hear, about access for, certain people and how to manage that. And yeah, I noticed that Edith has some points to raise. So Edith, do you want to maybe talk to it at all, or are you happy just to share it within the chat? So you're welcome to share your screen and ask the question if need be.
Yeah, you're welcome to show your video.
Edith, are you happy with the chat? Do you want to speak to it at all? You're welcome if you'd like.
Hello, do you hear me?
We do, thank you.
Hi. No, really thank you for the opportunity to let me ask these questions, because I just find it really struggling to have these kind of people being represented in sustainable tourism. I think a lot of people with mobility challenges or any kind of disability, they feel like they don't really belong there, because a lot of times sustainability, we're talking about backpacking and camping and things like that, you know what I mean? And it can be less accessible for them. And I think it's something we overlook a lot. And I think it's something we need to address a lot more, because there's a lot of people who would like to do more, who would like to be better in sustainable tourism and in responsible tourism, but their health issues make it almost impossible, you know, to go to this kind of tourism. That's what I just wanted to mention.
Thank you. Paul or Ted or any of the other panel, do you want to address that
I
at all?
could probably just comment on one element. It's not directly in my chapter, but it's in others. And it has to do with the consultative process and of getting information to the traveler. And the one solution that we have come up with that doesn't involve a lot of money is information. And at least providing the information to the person when they go somewhere, so that if they know there are 25 stairs to go up before they go, they can choose another place. If they know there's an elevator, they can choose another place. And it's just information. If you're interested, I put my website on the thing. We've developed one, and it's being flogged through a few handicapped organizations. But definitely it's an element of tourism that we can all build in better. And most of the tools to help you do that better are in the book already.
Great, thank you, Ted. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I guide on nature guiding, and I've had some particularly elderly people that literally can't even walk 20 steps. It's a real reality, and you actually don't even know that that's an issue until sometimes you're faced with it. So the communication up front, the consultation up front is very important to understand that person's needs, and then also to cater toward it in the best way possible in planning and whatnot. So yeah, communication is essential in that respect. Thank you. I think next let's move on to Ron's question. Ron had a question regarding documenting good practice. And just to read that question out, it basically states, in terms of documenting good practice, what are the tips in keeping ourselves informed when it comes to responsible, regenerative, conscious, indigenous, sustainable travel and tourism? Ron, do you want to speak further to that, or are you happy that the panel can address that on your behalf? If you'd like to ask anything further, you can unmute and talk further. Otherwise, just indicate if you'd like him to address it.
Okay, I don't hear Ron, but yeah, would anyone like to say what the best ways are to be keeping informed, good communication, making sure we have all the right knowledge? Well, firstly, obviously, buy the book, because that's hot off the press, really good information, lots of excellent things in there. That would be my top tip to start with. There are also various resources, for example, on nature-based tourism. The World Bank produced a database and a compendium of best practice and resources and networks on nature-based tourism, which came out last year, and I can share the link. The World Resources Institute is working at the moment with the World Bank to develop a similar database and collation on marine resources for coastals and destinations and SIDS. But if there are any other resources people would like to share, please feel free. No other suggestions. Okay, so obviously buy the book, Ron. There's you go. I'll send you the link now.
Yeah, and then Alexandra, thank you so much for your inputs, particularly around the certification and audits. And obviously you're interested in Monica's useful tools and resources. Alexandra, do you want to ask anything further, or Monica, do you want to maybe address it and take it further on that?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm not sure if Alexandra is still here. I know she had a question about my slides. I'm happy to share them after the presentation.
Yeah.
Alexandra's with us, so please proceed, and then you can interact. Yeah.
Say that again, Michael. Sorry, was that to me? Was that?
Yes, you're welcome to talk further, and then Monica can respond. Thanks.
Okay.
So thank you. I mean, this is great. It's been a long day for us all. I think we started quite early, 15 hours ago we started, but with the first meeting, but it's been really good. So thanks to all of you, and to Anna particularly, for this is the second session that you're running, and to Michael. My question is really that the focus is on certificates and audits, but there are other tools that businesses use to assess sustainability, to manage sustainability. But also these certificates tend to be used at a specific business level. And
Right.
I'm interested, I know the GSTC has created a set of criteria at destination level.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much is that used, or what other tools are used at a destination level. For example, for collating all the information collating information for operators in a particular destination and galvanizing all of that, or collating all of that to a regional level, national level, global level, feeding these things up into SDGs, to climate change, that don't happen at a business level, they happen at national, global levels. And Ted, yes, you've got, if you see where I'm going with this
Respond
question.
if you want me to.
So, if you don't mind, I'm going to try to answer that question. I'm not going to have a full answer right away, but I know GSTC, it's basically one of the most significant factors in the governance of certification programs. And the reason I say this is because they have reached out, when they put together their criteria, they've reached out to the ICL organization, and also basically what they did is they looked into the international ISO standards. So what they did, they created a multi-level tier certification or criteria certification. So they address operators, they also address group certification, they have standards, or they have criteria for all these different actors in the tourism industry. This chapter basically focused on auditing for certification bodies, right? So that's just one small niche, one small thing, that's part of the global framework of certification, but that there's so much. This is why I said that it's a very complicated topic or industry, at least for new beginners, for people who just start in this industry. It took a while until I understood a little bit of the global framework. And sometimes there is a lot of disconnect also between, you mentioned the SDGs. There is some disconnect between the SDGs being implemented or incorporated or adopted or worked with, by GSTC, by Alliance. They have a little bit of information on their website, but looking at the different things that they were talking about and how they use these SDGs, I was under the impression that there wasn't a lot. Now, if you go on the SDGs website and if you look at the World Tourism Organization, of course that there is a lot, but I think it's up to each individual and each professional to kind of like try to link the details of that together.
Therein lies the problem.
That's my take on how these things interact right now in the industry. I may be wrong. I'm not saying I'm fully right, but that is just my personal opinion. I did spend a lot of time on the GSTC website. I basically went through everything that they have there. I also looked into the ICL because at the beginning, I wasn't sure. I didn't understand exactly where they took their criteria from, how they developed that criteria, how did they came to it. So by trying to research, that I found out that there are, these international organizations that are very regulated, government regulated, that have nothing to do with NGOs. NGOs usually use them to kind of like put together their criteria and simplify it in a way.
Thank you, Monica. I was just wondering, Alexandra, do you actually have any ideas about how this problem can be resolved? What would be your thoughts?
Well, and I think Ted wanted something to say. Should we let Ted go first and then I'll answer your question, Anna?
Sure. Sorry, Ted. I didn't.
So thank you, Monica, as well for that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. A lot of people would really like to get to standards, but we're finding most can't, or many can't. So I've been on almost every international initiative trying to develop indicators, criteria, et cetera, from the early 90s. And we've been working to make them better and to try and get people at least to talk to each other about them. You know, we started with the WTO, then the UNWTO, then we did the stuff with the Carpathians, then we did the stuff with Europe, then we developed the stuff with GSTC. And right now we're in the middle of helping establish observatories which integrate this even more. It is all designed to help people manage themselves. It is not designed necessarily to support any certification, although should people wish to go use it and go that way, fine. You'll find some of that in my chapter. And certainly I would encourage people to try and take it further. But right now, the financial barriers to do that effectively everywhere are just too great. And so we've always felt the philosophy was to encourage people to get to the best stuff we could make available to them through governments, through NGOs, through UN, through others. And hopefully people will make big bucks as consultants helping them do it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you both very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got 4 minutes left, and Ernesto had a question particularly posed to Shane. Ernesto's question was if you could comment if the chapter on tourism effects on biodiversity also includes possible positive effects, such as trails that represent corridors and promote connectivity between natural areas. Ernesto, do you want to say anything further, or can Shane just address that? If you'd like to, you can unmute. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, guys. I'm a Brazilian National Park manager, but I'm now developing my PhD at University of Florida in the same program as Shane, the interdisciplinary ecology, and I'm studying long distance trails. So I'm interested in the whole of this kind of trails to promote connectivity. And I'd like to know a little bit more about this chapter. If you study in any way the effects on biodiversity, positive effects in biodiversity. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. We haven't had the chance to meet, but yeah, I'm Shane. It's great to see you. I've reached out to the science library and asked if they would be willing to purchase a copy of the book. So it might be something that you can get your hands on and check out that chapter. But so not directly, I can't say that that it highlights positive effects. I think to some extent the positive effects are the no impact, so that it provides the habitat quality. On that matrix, there is a component of connectivity. And in the index, it discusses the importance of connectivity and what connected versus disconnected means. And that, I think that scale of quality gives the users the opportunity to see, is connectivity going up or going down? Is it being maintained? In the sense of being able to offer some reward mechanisms or sense of if they're doing great, it's more of a are we maintaining this as is? So by monitoring the habitat and wildlife, again, it's that question of, is habitat going up or down? Or wildlife presence going up or down? And through that, you can get a sense of the positive contributions of the tourism operations. If I could just throw in a side comment to the previous discussion, I would also say, I think this might highlight the significance of innovating tools outside of standards that businesses can use at that level. Although, you know, we said that there's big bucks in it, I think because it's so costly that's a barrier. And I think it's important to simultaneously create options for operators and businesses to evaluate without having to make that financial commitment right off the bat. So just a side comment from me.
Thanks
Great,
so much,
thank you.
Shane. We actually coming to a close from for the period that we have for our hour. So I'd like to really thank everybody from the really rich discussion. In wrapping up, I'd like to remind you all that because this is a book launch, the book is available on the Edward Elgar website in hardback and eBack versions. And please also do remember that there is a really good discount available if you can buy a copy today or tomorrow. It closes on Friday on the hardback, and the ebook version is also very reasonably priced. And so I'd just really like to thank everybody, all the authors, for sharing their insights. Thanks to Michael for co-hosting. Thanks to everybody who's joined us today. We will put the recording for this event and the previous launch online. If you put your email into the chat, we will be able to send that to you directly. Otherwise, look for them on LinkedIn. And if, as we wrap up, if you would like to just share your video and say hi, we can have a big hey, how are you doing? And goodbye and thank you. Okay, so everyone put your videos on. Just say hello from Papua New Guinea. And it was really good to see you all today.
Thanks. We just after midnight in South Africa, but it was great being with you guys. Thank you so much, and lovely.
Thank you as well.
Thanks so much for staying awake, Michael.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Great.
Thanks,
Thanks,
folks.
Alexandra.
Great talking
Thanks,
to you.
everyone.
Thanks, Hannah and
Buy the
Michael.
book.
Do this again soon.
Yeah, you'll keep in touch, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Great to meet everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.